paid for by the UK government, who then gets that money from all of us via our taxes. About 1/3 is paid for by foreign governments as arms exports. So it's mostly government money that could be doing good things, but is instead being spent on weapons and equipment. Employs about 100,000 people, and there are hundreds of arms companies in the country, but we'll talk a little bit more about them in a moment. And primarily the arms industry in this country makes combat aircraft and associated equipment like missiles, warships and subs, tanks, and kind of military sort of soldiering equipment. So let's talk about the arms industry, the arms companies. Really, you can divide them into two. You've got BAE Systems and everybody else. So BAE Systems is the country's largest arms company. It's kind of absorbed a lot of the smaller companies. It's responsible for something like £11 billion worth of exports. And the reason there's a slight disconnect between that and the 8 billion I talked about is because some of those exports are kind of components and things we don't really know about. So a lot of that stuff is exports of services, that sort of thing. So you've got BAE Systems, and then you've got the subsidiaries of American arms companies, like L3Harris, but also people like Raytheon and MBDA, who make missiles, Thales and Leonardo, who are, again, French and Italian, who make aircraft stuff, Airbus and Rolls-Royce is UK. So that tends to be the arms industry itself. Big chunk of Britishness, a lot of American subsidiaries, and then small suppliers of components. How are we doing? Okay, we're getting there. Who buys the stuff? Well, you look at the arms exports, I mean, the UK buys them, but when we look at arms exports, half of them go to the Middle East. They go to Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, all of which, Egypt, countries which I think all of us are concerned about with regards to human rights, but also have a major impact in terms of fossil fuels being sold to the West that's used to pay for Western weapons. And each time that loop goes round, corrupt money finds its way to these royal families. So that's what's driving a lot of this stuff. And we sell the weapons, royal family gets a kickback. They sell the oil, royal family gets a kickback. We can all drive our cars, okay? We should be maybe electrifying those. And they use those weapons to effectively oppress their people and blow up their neighbours. So you might say, well, surely the government does something about this. And the answer is, yeah, it's got an arms export promotion service, which also licenses stuff. So if you want to, So if you want to export weapons, you've got to get a license to do it. But the people that give you the license are also the people that go out and actually, they visit arms fairs in Saudi Arabia, they go and talk to all these government officials, they make the sales, government to government, and then come along and say, hey, got that export license for you. So what tends to happen is, once you've got the arms exports going in, as soon as countries like Saudi Arabia start dropping bombs on their neighbours, as they did in Yemen, very hard to stop. So that's your whistle-stop tour of the UK arms industry. Let's talk about its impact, and let's touch a bit on climate. You heard from CEOB. It's very good. So most people think about weapons in terms of the context of conflict. And you heard what Lindsay was talking about. There's kind of three elements to that. There's the fuel that goes into running the military around the place, which we kind of know about, and which she was talking about this. I think she was talking about the war in Ukraine is equivalent to the emissions of, say, the Netherlands. So just on fuel. So there's the fueling the military. There's making the equipment and the bombs. It's secret. Nobody knows. There's guesses, but nobody knows. It's a lot, I'm going to say. And then there's the climate impact of essentially rebuilding and reconstructing, and nobody really knows about either. There's guesses, there's estimates, but that's not known. So the amount of knowledge in this area, I think Lindsay would say the same, is dreadful. And especially when you think the impact of conflict in terms of number of people killed. So for example, in Yemen, 277,000 people died, of which 8,000 were killed by the bombing, but 269,000 were killed through, I'm going to say, destruction of the food supply, destruction of medical supplies, destruction of water systems, destruction of food systems, farming and industry, massive pollution naturally. So, you know, we're talking about human disaster as well as an environmental disaster. And again, Helen was talking, Lindsay was talking about this in terms of if you've got things like fires and deforestation, as well as the impact of bases and the pollution that military bases cause. That's a different question. So that's conflict. Let's talk about oppression. And one way to think about oppression is the control of spaces. And this, I got this from our lovely friends, War Resistance International, who have a great zine they put out this a couple of months ago. And they say that oppression is about the control of decision-making spaces and the control of physical spaces. And as an example, I went to a talk from some really wonderful people from Mexico, London, Mexico Solidarity, and they were talking about the highlands of Mexico, which is kind of building a lot of these kind of so-called green projects, big dams, railways, but also mines for things like lithium that's going to go into our batteries. And to make that happen, the Mexican military go into that area, swamp the place. The drug gangs who are there gun down the military guns down the drug gangs. The local landholders who've been exploiting the local people gun down everybody else. And meanwhile, everybody else, like the people who live there, the people who've farmed in that area, find themselves in the middle of a massive gunfight. And those weapons come from the United States, and they come from here, Hector and Cock up in Nottingham. So that's the thing that happens. And none of the people who are affected by that are in the room when the decision's made. The control of decision-making spaces isn't with them, it's with the government. So, so extractivism and pollution are another key impact of militarism. And I think the final thing, I've got 1 minute 46 seconds. The final thing is talking about resources. And again, Lindsay touched a bit on this. Obviously 5 to 6% of climate emissions from the military, so it's a big chunk of change. It's also $2 trillion a year worth of spending. That's a lot of money that could be going on climate change, climate technologies. And what we found, we did a study on universities and how this country is spending its money. And a lot of what we think, what the government calls climate money, is actually being spent on greening the arms industry, making a greener bomb. And I've got a couple of great quotes. So again, credit to War Resistance International and Nico Edwards, who is one of your local researchers. They say they want the same missions, lower emissions. And it's like, you know what? Your bombs killed 277,000 people. It would be really good if we didn't have those missions. That would be brilliant. Yeah. And we've obviously seen what's going on in Gaza. And Rolls-Royce call climate change a war-fighting opportunity. So I think for us, we would rather not have war-fighting opportunities to this. And I think it's really important as we make these connections to don't allow the military to set the terms of this discussion. Don't let them present climate as a security problem. Climate is a health and human services issue. So I think one of the things we'll hear about today is let's think about some of the things that we can do to move this stuff forward. And I would argue that the best way to reduce military emissions is to reduce military operations and to have less of it. So hopefully that's it. Thank you very much.